Welcome to the Southern Ground Hunting video podcast, and I'm your host, Parker McDonald. The Southern Ground Hunting podcast is dedicated to bringing you the best tips, tricks, and tactics from public land hunters all over the South. I hope you'll stick around and maybe even subscribe. You can also find this podcast in audio form anywhere podcasts can be found by searching Southern Ground Hunting. I hope you guys enjoy the show. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Local Legends series on the Southern Ground Hunting podcast. We're really excited today because we have got something that is entirely different, really, from anything that we've ever talked about. And I want to kind of preface it by saying this. When we do an episode that has to do with people that are hunting in Florida, it seems to get a lot more traffic. People really enjoy that, and here's why I think that is. And Drew, you're a Florida boy, so I'm going to let you talk about this here in just a second. But when it comes to hunting in Florida, I believe, this is just a personal belief, and I could probably find some statistics to prove it, but I believe that hunting in Florida is the hardest state to whitetail hunt. I believe that with all my heart, and I don't live in Florida. I have hunted Florida, and I believe it to be the toughest whitetail state. Now, when it comes to hunting in Florida, there are guys who are all over the state of Florida that are just absolutely crushing the game. We talk to a lot of them on here. But when I think about, like, South Florida, when I think about, Drew, the Everglades, I'm not thinking about deer hunting, right? Like, usually I'm thinking, where's a good spot that we could, like, go to a port to go on a cruise or something like that? Or maybe we could go alligator hunt or something like that. Is that kind of a far and wide opinion of even Florida residents, Drew?
Yeah, I would say so, Parker. Growing up in North Florida, that was kind of the Everglades were known more for their wildlife as a whole, and especially fishing. And so you could get some good spots in there fishing wise. And then when I went to college, I actually went to college in Lakeland, which is more southern Florida. I mean, the perception really didn't change much. I mean, the Everglades is widely known as a variety of wildlife, but especially on the fishing side. But now, recently, with the alligators and snakes and all that stuff, those have kind of taken over the perception of it. And so it's a really interesting spot. And but to find somebody that kills white-tailed deer on it, and not just white-tailed deer, but has opportunities and harvest good bucks. Just like you said, Parker, Florida is, in my opinion, the hardest place to hunt. And if you kill a 130 in Florida, I would venture to say it's equivalent to a Boone and Crockett anywhere else.
Sure.
Just by the sheer, especially on public land. If you can kill a deer like that on public land, man, that is that is Boone and Crockett level. And so I'm excited to talk with our guest today. It's such a cool episode, man. I'm just so jacked for it.
Yeah. So with that being said, we're going to welcome to the show Ryan Carter. Ryan, how's it going, buddy?
I'm doing great, guys. Just living the dream, hot, sunny, humid Florida.
Is it ever different where you're at? Like, is it pretty much that way all the time?
No, I mean, it starts cooling down in it's January. We get a couple of months of a little bit drier weather, and we'll get some cooler weather from time to time. I think this year, the lowest it got was down into the mid to low 40s.
That's still pretty chilly. That's surprising.
Not a lot of cool weather.
That's
yeah. I mean, we every couple of years we'll get a freeze, a good hard freeze down here, and that's everybody runs to the local Walmart to buy coats at that point. But other than that, it's mostly just a humidity change. Yeah. Nice and cool, and a lot less humidity.
That's pretty cool, man. That's not cool at all. I would hate that. That would be terrible. But what is cool is through this Local Legend series, what we do is we talk to average guys who have had above average success, and you definitely fit the bill. And You were recommended to me by my buddy Adam Cruz, and I really trust everything the guy says. So I did a little research, and man, I got to say, dude, I'm totally impressed. So I'm super excited to get into this episode that's talking about hunting whitetail deer in the Everglades. But I want you to start out by saying, right now, I mean, we're sitting here, it's July the 7th. We just celebrated the 4th of July. It's July the 7th, and you were talking earlier about seeing bucks chasing does hard-horned right now. Talk about that for a second.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting deal down here. About 10 years ago, 10 years ago or so, the FWC, the Florida Wildlife Commission, actually held a big meeting, or held several meetings in the state of Florida, and actually changed the opener of archery, moved it a month ahead. So now it starts the end of July, beginning of August, depending on how that weekend falls, so that we can actually have an opportunity to hunt some of the rut. And it's one of those crazy things where you'll have 10 does come by and none of them are in heat. And then all of a sudden you've got one doe that's hot and the deer are going crazy around her. I've seen them, like I said, June 1st, hard-horn, rutting, chasing does, neck swollen, going to town. And then I've also, on the flip side of that coin, seen spotted fawns as late as September. So depending on the area, I personally believe waterfall. And what I mean by that is we hunt swamps down here. Southern part of Florida is primarily swamps. And so I know, out Midwest and up north, when it gets colder, the rut tends to kick off mid-November-ish, early November, and that's when snowfall starts coming in. And I believe a lot of that has to do with, them dropping their fawns at the right time of the spring. I believe the very same thing takes place here based upon waterfall. And so when the water levels tend to rise, I believe that will kind of kick off the rut up to some degree, so that in the spring or in January and February, when we're in our drier season, they're not dropping fawns in knee-deep, shin-deep water.
That makes a lot of sense. That's
again, that's just my kind of putting it all together over the last 30 years of hunting down here. But again, that's what I believe to be the case.
So have you been hunting this same area? Were you born and raised right here? And talk about when you started hunting and kind of those moments that you were like, yeah, this is something I'm going to do forever.
Oh my gosh. So yes, I was born in Florida. I live on the west coast of Florida, southwest Florida. I'm fourth generation Floridian, or Florida cracker. And the property that we hunt is in the middle of Big Cypress. My great-grandparents actually used to own a piece of property in Big Cypress. There are still a few landowners in there that really pushed back against the government when they were taking it away. My grandparents, unfortunately, did not. But we still hunt the very same areas that my great-grandparents were hunting, 50 plus years ago.
Wow.
60 years ago. So
that's
it's pretty incredible.
That is crazy. So how old were you when you really started getting into hunting down there? And it seems like it would be a tough thing to get into, because when I think about my childhood growing up, and a lot of people growing up, you got hooked by those target-rich environments. Like for me, living in West Texas, going to the hill country, I got hooked on it because I saw deer a lot when I first started, and when I was a young kid, going down there and starting your whole hunting lifestyle down there has got to be a little bit more difficult. Tell me about that.
So to access Big Cypress, again, I talked about water, swamps. Big Cypress, the Everglades, is essentially a river, just very shallow river. And so to access this place, you can really do it one of three ways. You can walk it, you can airboat in some areas, or you can build a swamp buggy and use that to access. So growing up, my brother and I, it was an adventure for us. Obviously we were very young. We started going down there at the age of 4 and 5. Very rugged terrain, but there were these great big giant man-made buggies, swamp buggies with huge tires on them that we're going through the swamp, and we're getting stuck, and we're building fires. And so it was really this big, great adventure that we were taking as kids, that just kind of morphed into, obviously my dad and my uncles and my grandparents were hunting with us, and occasionally they would kill a deer, and we got to help hang it and skin it, and then partake of the backs, the loins as well. But it really just became this awesome experience that we got to enjoy with the family, with the swamp buggies, and we would do some frog gigging. And there weren't a ton of deer when I was younger. The population was kind of on the rise. Years and years and years ago, my dad used to tell me that, the old timers, if it was brown, they shot it. Very seldomly ever saw a buck rub. Very seldomly ever saw a buck. My great grandfather was known for saying, "You can't eat those horns," and that's unfortunate that those people thought that way, because they really did destroy the deer population so many years ago. But as far as when I got started, gosh, I remember my dad putting me in a stand and driving away on the swamp buggy. And I probably could have eaten a banana sideways at the grin on my face. I couldn't have been more than 10 years old the first time he left me in the stand alone with a rifle. Of course, I didn't see anything whatsoever. I could see half a mile around. I didn't see a single deer. But it was an incredible experience, and it was always something that I knew that from I think day one that this was going to be a huge part of my life as long as I could physically do it.
That's pretty cool, man. So as you were talking, I looked up a swamp buggy. My actual Google search was swamp buggy Everglades, and I'm looking at this thing, and I'm like, yeah, that would hook me too. I think as a kid, that's pretty freaking cool. I gotta know, how do you make a swamp buggy? Like, what's that built on?
Well, ours is built on. Give me a second here. It's a vehicle frame. And then from there, everything else is completely fabricated. I can't remember what, some type of, it wasn't a Jeep, it was a little longer. I forget exactly what frame we used. Our buggy we built when I was 12 or 13. Me, my brother, and my dad, we built this thing. And my dad had me and my brother, my older brother, Dave, he was 14, I was 13. And he was teaching us how to weld. We were grinding. I mean, we were just all these things when we were a kid, and that was part of the experience. So it's kind of come up with an idea of what you want, depending on the area you're hunting. We hunt through. We have to access through a lot of cypress and old Jeep buggy roads, which are very narrow. So we have to be careful of how wide we set our tires, how wide we set our deck, because we have to be able to maneuver through these old roads through cypress heads and rocks and muck and mud. And so I think we run, what do we run? Dana 44 front end, or Dana 70 front and rear. We're running an 18.426 tire. 26 is the wheel size, so they come up about mid-chest on me. I'm 6'2". Total weight on the vessel is about 4,200 pounds before we load it with ice and coolers and people and guns and shells and all those good things. And yes, they will get stuck. And then the work really begins. But just a lot of fun, and for years, and there's a couple of places in Florida that still allow you to actually hunt from a swamp buggy. And they, there's a place up the road here from me called Cecil Webb, Babcock Webb Ranch. It's 84,000 acres. It's a 9-day general gun season. And you literally run over palmettos, jump the deer up, chase them down, and shoot them.
Wow.
And it's not much for a sport hunting. It can be exciting. It can be fun. Not really my cup of tea. But at the same time, it's part of the Florida heritage, and you kind of don't want to see that get taken away,
Well, and just to be honest, it sounds like a whole lot more fun than sitting around at home playing video games. Like,
it sure is.
Is this something that's like standard? So you have like ATVs in the South and in the Midwest. Is this something that's like standard for hunting and deer hunters down there?
If you're going to hunt the cypress, yes. Now, as the side-by-sides advance and the four-wheelers and the ATVs have progressed, there are a lot of people that will use those now. The problem is you can't see anything off of them. What I mean by that is when we're talking grass that's anywhere from waist high to 10 feet tall, kind of difficult to be able to see much off of them. If you're still hunting, that's perfectly fine because you're just going to get in, you're going to walk to your stand and those kinds of things. But really to carry the gear with you that you need to spend 4 or 5 days and then take 3 or 4 people in there and actually camp and have the adventure and hunt, a swamp buggy is, unless you're going to have several side-by-sides, a swamp buggy would be pretty much a crucial piece of the key.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Like I'm blown away, Drew. Is this something that you've known about? Like, do people use this in northern Florida?
No, we don't use swamp buggies. It's all four-wheelers and ATVs and stuff. The only time I've ever seen a swamp buggy was on Swamp People, on the TV show, and so this is amazing. I'm just sitting back just listening, and it's talking about using the swamp buggy to jump up deer. I mean that's what we would do in North Florida just with dogs, and so it's just I've never heard of this type of hunting before, and it's crazy because I grew up in Florida. I was born and raised in Florida, and I just never heard of this type of hunting, and I just think it's incredible. It's so interesting.
So Ryan, is there a culture?
It's different.
Is there a culture of deer hunters there? Like, and is it a big, huge deal, or is it kind of like few and far between? Because when I think about southern Florida, I think about Miami. You just don't see a lot of like outdoorsmen coming out of that area. So I want to know, is this something that like you have a lot of hunting buddies and it's a big deal and opening day is going to be loaded up with people, or is it just kind of like you're the only one in your group of friends that deer hunts type deal?
It's a big deal. It's a very big deal. Florida is pretty rich with public land, and there's a lot of leased property as well. Believe it or not, it would be cheaper for me to go to Alabama or Georgia and lease a piece of property than it would be to lease a piece of property here.
Wow.
Far cheaper, actually, because there are that many people that are looking for a place to hunt of their own down here. In fact, let's see, Fort Myers, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, Orlando, Tampa. I think there's 6 or 7 Bass Pro Shops in Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
If that gives you any idea of the outdoor, the people that are looking for something to do outdoors. Obviously, the fishing is a big part of that, right?
Sure.
But no, in fact, we have a quota draw system for most of the public land. And if you don't have 4 or 5 preference points, you can forget about getting one of the better hunts in the area.
Wow.
Or within a 4-hour driving range, anyways.
That's
so yes, it is a big culture. In fact, the areas I was telling you about, Cecil Webb, it's a 9-day hunt. They give out, I forget exactly how many quotas. I want to say it's 400, 500. It's a giant party. The swamp buggy thing is big enough that there are quite a few people that make a living building and fabricating swamp buggies, and make a very good living doing it.
That's cool.
So it's a big party. Everybody shows up to show off their great big jacked up, 500 horsepower machine to kill a 75-pound deer.
So there are a lot of hunters. We kind of established that, which that's in the couple of times that I've hunted in Florida, I realize that there's definitely a culture of deer hunters. It's kind of a different culture, but then there's guys who are like, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. There's the type people that are listening to hunting podcasts, and there's the type people that are, really, really trying to learn, and guys like yourself trying to learn what deer are actually doing, not just going out there with their guns and their natty lights and all that stuff. Like, there's guys that are really trying to figure these deer out, and that's a whole different category. And I'm not trying to like bash the other group of guys, because that's definitely a part of, the, like you said, a Florida heritage, and that's fine. But then there's the guys that are the hardcores. Is there a lot of those type of guys there where you're at?
There are. There aren't as many. One of the big cypress, like as I mentioned, is roughly 700,000 acres, and so I do a good bit of hunting down there. And I've heard a lot of people say, "Well, there's just people everywhere." The way I see it is, if you're hunting next to somebody, it's because you choose to.
Yeah.
There's enough land that you should be able to find a spot all of your own, if you're willing to put the hard work in and put the miles in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's anywhere. We talk about it a lot. We talk about, if you have the drive and the willingness to go out and try to figure out, not only figure out more about the deer, but figure out more about the land and hunt some of those harder to get to areas and things like that, you're going to find that most people are not willing to do that. And so that's really interesting to hear coming from you. And I think, definitely when I think of South Florida, I'm not thinking of like hardcore deer hunting or anything like that, but knowing that there are guys like yourself down there doing that is pretty cool. I think that's good as far as just like, learning about you and the area that you hunt and things like that. Drew, do you have anything on that note?
No, I'm just really ready to pick Ryan's brain on how he goes about, finding these deer basically in a 700,000 square foot swamp.
700,000 acre, right?
Yes.
Correct.
Sorry.
700,000 square feet. I don't know if that's like massive.
Well, I couldn't kill a deer in that. So I mean, but.
What if this episode we found out that Drew, when he looks at the number on like the public land that he's hunting, the acreage number, he's thought it was square feet this whole time. So,
that's why I could only shoot at does and hit trees in front of them, Parker. That's the only reason why.
We've all done it.
That's funny. That's awesome. All right, so Ryan, I want to get into your style of hunting. So obviously you hunt what you called Big Cypress, the Everglades, just this swampy type area that does not look like it would be easy to hunt. Tell me a little bit about your style of hunting, and what I mean by that is like, what is your what kind of tactics are you using? How are you accessing and things like that? Things that when you look at a piece of property, how you kind of go over it. So we're gonna kind of hit on a lot of things right here, but I think it's going to be very valuable to the podcast. So first and foremost, tell me about your style of hunting, and kind of what you're using. If you're using a tree stand, saddle, still hunting, stuff like that. Just an overall, like a brief overview of your style.
So I love the bow hunt. That's my. If I could choose the rest of my life to spend my life hunting with one way, it would be with a bow and stick in my hand. So that would be option number one. And to do so, I like to be in a position that I can have the opportunity to kill a deer or harvest an animal or have a shot at an animal from my stand. But I also like to be able to see a long ways if possible. So when I'm looking for an area to hunt, obviously I'm looking for higher deer populations, but I'm looking for an area that I can put a stand up, a climber, typically moving toward the saddle here very soon, that I can get up off the ground and be able to glass and look for deer. They're kind of hard to see when they're smaller and in tall grass, but really be able to kind of use that as an opportunity to scout as I'm hunting. And then in that same token, if I feel like that animal is in a vulnerable, killable area, that I can slip in, or then I'll try to slip on them and make something happen. Or, depending on the time of the year that we're in, if it's early September in Big Cypress, which is kind of the tail end of the rut, if you can find a buck out on his own moving around, then you can use some different techniques to actually bring them to you. So that's kind of my preferred. I like to be in a perched position that I can have an opportunity to shoot, but also use that area to scout a quarter mile, half mile, a mile circumference around me at the same time.
So there's a couple things in there that I want to kind of hit on and ask you to break down for me. So that's honestly, for the guys that we talk to most of the time on the podcast, they're usually saying hunt thick, like hunt the thickets, find those really thick areas, and that's where you're going to find the bucks at. You seem to be saying something that's quite the opposite. Granted, what you're hunting is quite the opposite type area anyways, but whenever you're up in a tree and you're kind of in one of those open areas, scouting / hunting, are you finding that the deer in those areas, especially when it comes to bucks and mature bucks, are they usually traveling in those thicker areas, and you're just seeing them from a long ways away? Or is it kind of, I guess, is that really influencing how they travel at all there?
No, I don't think it's really influencing how they travel at all. So part of the reason that I like to hunt that is I can scout it, but we have these cabbage heads or pine heads with palmettos in them, and usually they will change in elevation by 2 or 3 feet. So that may mean now that cabbage head or pine head is up out of the water, which would give an animal an opportunity for a place to bed. So what I've noticed over the last 15 years of hunting a few particular areas is that the more mature deer, when they're on their feet and moving, will actually go from pine head to pine head to pine head, cypress head to cypress head, or same thing with cabbage head, actually circling downwind of them, checking for a bedded doe or a hot doe in that particular area. So usually I will set up on the downwind side if possible, to try to put myself in a position to catch that mature animal coming by. But as far as mature animals walking the open, when the time is right, when they're feeling it, they will walk across the middle of a 1 mile wide open prairie.
Wow.
But they can disappear instantly.
Yeah.
Because of the height of the grass and there's little flag ponds or bushes. They'll just vanish almost instantly. In fact, when it's drier, they'll actually bed down out in these wide open sawgrass prairies, much like they will in corn, farm fields and corn and things of that nature.
So when you say mature deer, I want to know if it's a little bit different. What is the age class of a mature buck in that area?
Oh my goodness! So that's I like to try to hunt 4-year-olds. It's not always possible. You seldomly see one, but they are there. I think that there are not a lot of deer that in that area that make it to 5 and 6. I just really don't think there are. In all my years of hunting down there and riding buggies and such, I could probably say that I've only seen maybe a dozen that I would say were 5.5, maybe 6-year-old animals.
Wow.
And I would say it'd be generous.
Yeah, that's. That's typical of what I would think. For an area like that, would you say it's because of the kind of the nature of the property and the water and maybe some of the predators, or would you say that's due to hunting pressure?
A little bit of everything. So it's obviously a harsh environment. If they spend 7 months of the year walking through ankle to sometimes waist deep water. Obviously we have cottonmouths, we have rattlesnakes, and we have pythons now, big enough to eat deer. We have alligators. There are coyotes. There are bears, and we have the Florida famous panther, which, according to statistics, will take a mature cat will eat a deer a week, which is a pretty high number if you start calculating how many cats are actually living in Florida.
Wow.
So I think it's all of the above, and then also the hunting pressure. Up until what was it, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, you could shoot a spike 5 inches above the hairline. And most people that are out there, unfortunately, will harvest a spike. Now it's only a 3-point, so it's a forked horn. So, still a yearling, just had better genetics. So now, unfortunately, we're getting rid of the better genetic yearlings versus the ones that are going to grow up and not produce as much.
Yeah. When you say, kind of sticking in the same subject, when you talk about a mature buck, what can a guy expect? A 4-year-old buck to score there.
There,
like in the Everglades and in that area.
In the Everglades, if you kill a deer that goes 100 inches, you put him on the wall.
Right.
Just that's like shooting a 170 in the Midwest. Okay. 180 or better. I've not killed a 100-inch deer in the Cypress. My uncle, who's hunted his entire life, has killed the 98-inch deer in the Cypress, and that was back when you were allowed to basically hunt off of a buggy. My brother has not. I've got one friend who killed one that went right at 100. I know of a buck that went 119, which is just like, woo, wow.
Yeah.
However, that deer was tiny. It was one of the smallest deer. It was like the deer was like 85 pounds on the hoof versus some that we've seen that go 135, 140. So, my father did kill one with a rifle. Let's see, probably 9 years ago, that gross scored 112.
Golly.
And so that's the biggest I've personally set eyes on. Set hands on. I've seen some down there that would go in that range, but if you kill a 100-inch deer, if you kill a 95-inch deer down there, especially with a bow and arrow, you have done something.
Wow. That's so cool. I mean, it's so cool to see just the differences in that and how, honestly, like, there's like a nationwide scale that honestly I think needs to be adjusted for the state of Florida. And when you talk about even here in Alabama, there's some adjustment. All regions are not the same, and some of these, Pope and Young, Boone and Crockett, they need to be adjusted for different states. But that's just crazy to hear, that you personally don't know anybody that shot a deer over, what was it, 119 or something like that. Like, that's pretty incredible.
Not down there.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's crazy. So when you're targeting deer, you're gonna basically probably shoot anything, over 70 inches or something like that.
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair estimate. I mean, if I feel like he's a 3.5 pushing 4-year-old, I'll make an attempt. If he gets me excited,
Yeah.
Sure. I'll make an attempt to harvest that animal. Also, that will will also greatly depend on what my freezer looks like.
Yeah. I understand that too. I get both of those.
and unfortunately, we're not allowed to shoot does down here.
No does. So you're only killing bucks.
No does.
Huh. Wow.
Public land. There are a couple of management areas that will allow you to harvest a doe. And unfortunately, some of those are, the verbiage is a buck or a doe. So you save up all these points to draw that particular area, you harvest a doe, you're done.
Wow. Which a doe is kind of like a once-in-a-lifetime thing there, too. So it's kind of like, well, that's
yeah,
cool.
Now private land, you can kill them.
Okay.
But public land, you cannot.
Wow. That's pretty incredible. So let's dive into, I guess, literally dive into your access. So you're talking about using a buggy a lot, but you also mentioned doing some slipping, and when I think about that, I'm thinking definitely hip waders are going to be a must. Talk a little bit about how you're accessing typically, and what you're doing in that type of environment to be able to pull off like a successful spot and stalk or something like that.
Okay, so there are different zones within the Big Cypress National Preserve. Some of them you're allowed to archery, muzzleloader, and general gun hunt. Some of them you have to draw permits for some of those hunts. Others, one of the areas that I like to hunt is a archery only, period. There's no ever anything but a bow taken in there. It is also foot access only. It is roughly 5.5 to 6 miles, this particular zone, 5.5 to 6 miles wide by 25 miles long. And you cannot access it with anything. It's foot traffic only. So depending upon how you enter, or which side you enter from, one, you may need a canoe or a kayak to cross a canal. Others, you would not. You would just walk in. As far as hip waders, forget that idea. You will die. You will literally take them off and leave them in the woods. So you typically, you go as light as you can. It's September. It's 1,000 degrees, 1,000,000% humidity, and you're walking through like I said, anywhere from ankle deep water to usually, if you kind of pick your way around, you can avoid getting over knee deep, unless you just like to walk a straight line and go right to the middle of a flag pond or a cypress head.
Yeah,
you can avoid that. The issue that I found is because of the grass and the water, every step you're lifting your foot either up and out of the water and over the grass, or you're dragging it through the grass. I would say it is some of the hardest access that I've ever hunted, and I've hunted Oregon, Indiana, Alabama, Georgia, Missouri, Arizona, and nothing has ever broken me down like hunting in cypress. A mile in the cypress was a climber on your back, a backpack stuffed flat full of waters and Gatorades, because you're going to sweat every bit of it out of you. So, your backpack now is 25, 30 pounds. You got your tree stand on your back, your bow in your hand, your binoculars. A mile and a half down there will put it on you. It doesn't sound like a lot, but you will be 100% soaking wet before sun breaks.
Jeez. So, number
so
one...
you can basically take scent control out of the equation.
Yes, definitely. You need a saddle, bro. I'm sweating just sitting here. I'm sweating hearing you talk about it. So you're pretty much going out, like, sweat aside, like you're taking, boots in that wet environment. You're going out pretty much every day knowing that you're going to have wet feet at some point.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no. You can wear rubber boots. Problem is with that, once they fill up with water, now you're carrying that water around until you dump it out.
Yeah.
So I pretty much give up on having dry feet.
So do you just...
They're going to be wet.
What do you do? Do you just wear Crocs and just go, or how is that? How are you navigating that?
No, it depends. I try to wear as lightweight possible. So, like wading boots, like for fishing, you get a little zip up, little neoprene that come up to just above your ankle and they zip up.
Yeah.
Those work pretty good. They're fairly light. Problem is they don't have a lot of support, so your feet tend to hurt really bad afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But they're lightweight. They move through the grass easy. They're quiet when stalking an animal. Some folks choose to use tennis shoes. You can get fairly lightweight neoprene like knee boots. I don't wear snake boots because there's too much restriction on the movement. I do wear, like wraparound snake chaps because I'm going in the dark and really not looking where I'm putting my feet. Not to mention I can't see my feet anyways. But yeah, as far as clothing, basically you're just going to go as light as possible, and something that's not going to carry, once it hits water, it's not going to absorb too much and carry too much of that water because that's just extra weight that you're having to carry.
Wow. That's pretty crazy. Drew, you have anything on that?
Oh man, it's just so different. It's crazy because I like I said, I lived in Florida, and this hunting never even existed to me. So when it comes to like you were talking around about like scent control and stuff, you basically throw that out the window. Do you hunt the wind? Do you use thermals? Do you not use thermals, or do you just set up with your best chance and just say this? I mean, wind or not, this is where I'm going.
Yeah, pretty much. Wind or not, this is where I'm going. And that changes as the wind changes on a daily basis, depending on thunderstorms and things of that nature. They'll come up and the wind will change on a dime. So yeah, scent control is one of those things that you're not going to be scent free. You're just simply not. I've got friends that carry an extra change of clothes with them. They get to their stand, they take their wet clothes off, they change them. You still smell. Your clothes that you just took off and put in the trash bag still smell. So normally I get in the stand and the boots come off, the socks come off, and we start airing out, start drying out a little bit until the walkout comes in.
That's nuts.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you too was, do you were saying the bucks tend to check the high points there in the swamp. So do you do you focus mainly on them, or do you like you said, do you find like a big grass swamp and then just sit up over that and then watch it?
So I tend to, well, number one, the trees usually grow out of the little heads, whether it's a cabbage tree or a pine tree growing out of a cabbage head or a pine head or a cypress tree and a little cypress head in the middle. And they're usually the areas, like I said, what they are is prairies with, cabbage heads, pine heads, and cypress heads scattered throughout. And so you tend to be able to see deer crossing. And if you pay attention close enough, long enough, you'll see that those deer are using the same trails over and over again. And so that's when I'll take and make my move to be able to set up on a particular animal that I've seen, and then hope that he uses that trail again.
So
awesome.
So that's pretty cool, and I want to dive kind of into that. Where you're actually hunting and choosing to set up, and you mentioned before that you do a lot of aerial scouting to try to find new areas and to try to find places where you feel like would be a good pinch point or something like that. Can you kind of talk about your process of aerial scouting a little bit?
Yeah. So like I said, I do a lot of cyber scouting, and if you're going to hunt in the thick stuff or in the cypress heads, you may not be able to see as many of the game trails because there is so much grass, and the water that the animals tend to lay the grass down. So you can actually see a lot of those trails through cyber scouting. You do need to put boots on the ground to verify that they are in fact deer using those trails and not just an otter or a family of otters or a 12-foot alligator, or a bear trail coming out of a thick cypress head. So, you can be fooled by those. But, we have to put boots on the ground. I try. So because I've hunted there for quite a while, I happen to know certain areas that tend to hold more deer than others. And, kind of basing off of a lot of last year's information with the cyber scouting, I try not to put as much scent in there as possible. Unfortunately, because I am sweating so much, through the access, even just scouting with just a backpack and no stand, I am leaving a lot of scent and making a lot of noise walking through the water. So I try to stay out of those areas as much as possible leading up to opening weekend. So I don't, I'm not in there every weekend putting out cameras and checking them. Cell cameras are nice if you can get reception. But as far as finding a place, I cyber scout obviously, and I look for those trails going from head to head, or the heavier deer trail populations. When I'm putting boots on the ground, I'm looking for the tracks. I'm looking for obviously the buck rubs and scrapes, and trying to find a scrape line or a rub line, and that'll give me an idea of the quality or the age of the animals using the area, based upon obviously the size of the track, based on size of the trees they're using, how aggressive they're getting with the trees or the shrubs that they're rubbing on. I'll tend to use those as kind of a gauge age of the animals. And then I will look for easy access, where the deer are going to be at when I'm entering. Okay, am I going to be running the deer out of the prairie when I'm walking across that prairie? If so, how do I get to where I want to set up so that when the deer are coming off the prairie from feeding to back to bedding, that I don't, I haven't busted them all up. So all of those things will come into play with cyber scouting and also putting boots on the ground.
So you talked about deer feeding. Are they actually feeding? Is the prairie, I guess, kind of your food source, I guess, for lack of? It doesn't seem like there's probably a lot of food there.
There's a lot of food. Deer are browsers. They don't usually typically feed on one particular vegetation for a very long time. Depending on the time of the year, will determine whether they're feeding on acorns more than palmetto berries. September is usually a good time to catch them feeding on palmetto berries. And there are a lot of palmettos, so to set up on one head would be, very difficult. As far as the prairies go, there are so many different vegetations and grasses out there. It is very difficult to pinpoint what they're feeding on. They also feed a lot in cypress heads. So unfortunately, there's not really a way to hunt a food source in the cypress.
Wow.
That I've come across, that I've noticed.
Yeah, it seems like maybe there can really be food anywhere. Is there any places that you're like sold on? Obviously, the higher ground is going to be the more obvious bedding locations. Is there any differences between what you find mature bucks bedding versus young bucks and doe groups and things like that?
Yeah. Typically, the more, from what I've noticed, anyways, the more mature deer are bedding kind of off on their own.
Yeah.
They're picking out. It's interesting, but you walk through a cypress head, and there'll just be a little mound that's 4 foot by 5 foot. It's off the ground. Maybe it was created by a couple of cypress knees growing up, and that is usually a good. Usually, there's a more mature animal using that bed. Now, I'm not going to say that the younger animals won't use it or does won't use it as well, but typically, when I jump a deer off of a bed like that, when I'm in scouting or something, he's a pretty good animal.
So last week we talked to a guy named Nathan Killen, and he hunts the mountains of Virginia. And one of the things he was talking about was that a lot of the areas that have the most sign are the ones that he's kind of avoiding, and he's going to those areas where maybe the sign is a little more scarce, but that's where he's finding more of the mature bucks. Is that true down there in the Everglades, or is it kind of just, if there's deer, and that's pretty much what you're looking at?
Yeah, I can't say that would be necessarily true down here, or at least not that I've noticed, because of the population of the deer and how hit or miss it tends to be. I tend to focus on higher concentrations
Yeah.
to give myself a better opportunity.
Okay. I gotcha. So you're talking about, speaking of opportunity, you kind of mentioned, you like to hunt big areas where you can see a long ways, and we talked, before we hit record, we talked about, those opportunities being a lot more scarce than maybe a guy in the Midwest, or even more than a guy in northern Florida. It just maybe a little more difficult to get those shot opportunities. How are you setting up, like where you're picking your spot to actually hang your stand at? Hopefully, saddle soon. How are you picking your spot, and what does that spot normally look like?
So it's typically going to be, like I said, higher concentration of the deer activity through trails and cyber scouting. If I'm archery hunting, even into the deer, even into their muzzleloader or rifle hunting, it's going to be someplace I can see a long ways. But it's usually going to be, or I'm going to try to set up on the kind of the downwind side of either a cypress head, a cabbage head, or a pine head. That way, as these animals are coming off the prairie, a lot of times they'll kind of walk from head to head or just off the edge of the heads. But the more mature deer that I've noticed will actually circle, make big loops out across the prairie when they're on the move, when the feeling is right, and check head after head after head after head, because that's where the does will be bedded, looking for that hot doe. I don't think it's any different than hunting out in the Midwest when you have elevation changes and the does will be bedded on a ridge top or somewhere. The bucks tend to circle downwind of what they can call the bedding areas,
Yeah.
looking for that, checking that bedding area for a hot doe. And so I don't really think this is much different than that in any way. And so I will tend to set up in those areas.
Is there something that screams to you, like, I give an example, and everybody who listens to this already knows this about me, so I'm not telling them anything new, but it is something to maybe try to get an answer from you on this. So something that screams to me, like, this is where I'm going to hunt, like, this is a spot I need to check out at least, is a clear cut with a hard transition to pines, also in there a hard transition to hardwoods, and then some type of terrain feature close to that three-way transition line. That screams to me like I need to be here. Is there something that when you look at a map and you see it, it just is like more than any other area? That doesn't mean that this is the only type of areas that you hunt, but more than anything else screams, I need to be right here.
Yes. I love finding a prairie, a small, secluded prairie in the middle of thick woods.
Okay.
So that is one thing. So if I can find that hidden prairie that's in a cypress that nobody else has thought about accessing, or people look at it and say, no way, I'm just not going to do that. That is one thing. Another is you can look at some of these prairies, and if you just kind of look at them from a bird's eye view, you might look over it. But I believe that, there are cypress heads and then there's little strings of cabbage heads. I believe that you can use those as pinch points, where instead of the deer, won't necessarily all the time do this, but sometimes they will kind of work from head to head to head. And as far as I'm concerned, that's as good as a funnel, instead of just that animal walking across the middle of a half-mile wide open prairie.
Yeah.
They will use these heads not only as cover, but like I said, using them to check for hot does. And I believe that to be, obviously I'm sitting where I can see maybe a mile in every direction, or a mile in a couple of directions, or several hundred yards anyways. But that is to me as good as a funnel.
So these prairies are not like, you're not talking like a couple hundred yards. You're talking like at least a few hundred square feet, right, Drew? Like,
Yes, square footage. Square footage.
you're
Find something
talking,
the size of your house and hunt there.
but you're talking like a good distance, like a long ways.
Yes, sir. Like you need your binos.
And is this like a glassing type scenario, like, or are you like, especially with a rifle, are you planning on, taking shots? Are you prepared to take shots up to 400 to 500 yards, or up to 100 yards or so, or 60 or 70 yards with a bow? Like, are you, or is this just like glassing? I want to know kind of just what your setup looks like and what you're preparing for when the opportunity does come, if it ever comes.
So I'm prepared. I'm prepared to take a shot out of my stand. I'm going to put myself in a position where I feel like that's the best position to get a shot at a buck from my stand. But I'm also going to be prepared to glass, to find an animal or potentially see a buck, and then get down and make a move on that animal as well. So whether that be with a rifle or a bow, if he's half a mile away or a mile away, then obviously even with a rifle, I've got to close the distance.
Yeah.
With a bow, depending on which direction he is in, I will make a move as well. Now, if I'm already 3 miles in and he's another mile farther, probably not making that move today. Might not make it out.
Yeah.
So that'll be something that I prepare for maybe for my next trip in a couple of days.
Okay. So what's your shot distance, like range? What are you trying to look for, and what are you willing to take?
With a bow or with a rifle?
We'll start with a bow and then go into a rifle.
So with a bow, so a little backstory. A good buddy of mine lives out in Tucson, Arizona, and he's been asking me for years to come out there and chase these coos deer around the mountains with him in southern Arizona. So this past January, I actually did so. And he told me that I need to be hitting a pie plate at 100 yards every shot. So I started playing the stabilizer game and the adjustable sights and all that stuff, and I got really comfortable out to 90. I couldn't get any more elevation out of my sight than 90, so that's where I stopped. I figured if I couldn't get a shot at him at 90, then I was not going to do that. And being in Florida, I've never taken a shot like that. I've never even thought about taking a shot at 90. So I got pretty comfortable and was ready to, if necessary, make that shot out to 90 yards on an animal that is not aware that I'm there. There's a lot of people that'll say that is unethical, that is this and that. Well, one of the benefits I believe in taking that shot at that distance is that animal does not, if he doesn't know you're there, especially, he doesn't hear the bow go off. It's too far for him to hear the bow go off, so he's not really ducking the string. Whereas at a 30 to 40 yards, he hears the bow and there's that automatic reaction of trying to duck the string or duck the arrow. So there's, positives and negatives. Now, so that was the backstory. So I got very comfortable at the 90. I really, 50, if the wind conditions are right, again, the animal is not aware that I'm there, he's not on alert, something of that nature, I might take a shot to 60. But again, it would have to be the right conditions.
Yeah.
The perfect shot. With a rifle, same thing. Conditions have to be right. About 400 yards.
Wow, that's a poke. That's a poke out there. Are you doing anything specific to make sure you're zeroed in to that range? I mean, obviously you've got to be shooting some in the off season to prepare for that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the last, I mean, I try to shoot year round. This year has been a little bit of an exception. I left my garage open overnight, back right after I got back from Arizona. Somebody came in, and one of them was my bow. So I
Oh,
recently purchased a new one. It took me a little while, but I found the one I wanted and purchased it. So I'm just starting to get into that shooting game. But I like to try to shoot at least a handful of arrows a day. I don't have
okay.
to shoot a lot, but I need to shoot. I like to shoot every single day. I also made this little. It's kind of silly, but I took a little dumbbell that you can put adjustable weights on it, and it took some of my bow fishing string and title loopers on the top and title looper on the bottom, and made it just long enough to fit my draw length. And when I put this little wire on top of it as like a pin for my sight, and I just hold it out there and try to hold it as steady as possible and work on my trigger release and work on my, pulling through the shot, and not snatching the trigger and not, taking my eyes off the game. So I like to do that as well, just to exercise those muscles and exercise the visualizations of the shots.
Sure. Are you already doing that with a rifle and everything as well?
With a rifle, yes. Yeah, I don't rifle hunt that much, but I do shoot enough to know where my rifle is hitting at those distances.
Yeah. Okay. Drew, you have anything on that?
Um, yeah, just a couple things. When talking about access again, Ryan. Like I know here, and for most guys, we actually use water to our advantage. Like if we have a stream, we'll walk up it, to keep our scent in it. Do you find there with so much water? I mean, water being everywhere. Do you find that do you spook more deer walking in, just based on all the predators and everything? Do you spook more deer walking in with all the water, or do they just kind of just not jump unless something gets right on top of them?
No, they typically will spook. You'll never see them. You'll hear, especially in the dark. Obviously, you're not going to see them then, but you'll just kind of be walking along, and all of a sudden you stop because you think you hear something, and 150 yards away, you can hear a deer running through the water, or 8 or 10 deer running through the water. But you spook a lot of deer, which is why you try to access in a way that is going to allow you to get to your stand without spooking those deer, but it's inevitable, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing I was wondering about was when it comes to bug bedding, or just bedding just generally. Do you find that it is more? I know it's all scent based, but with it being so extreme down there, do you find that it is? Do you find them bedding more for sight or for smell, or a mixture of both?
Mixture of both. It's interesting. I did a muzzle load hunt 2 years ago. My cousin and I, we packed in, we built these, we call them rickshaws. They're basically like a wheelbarrow that's
Yeah.
long and lightweight with a 26-inch bicycle tire in the back, carts. And we carried all of our camping gear and everything in like 4.5 miles. And then from there, used that as our launching pad to hunt. And that opening morning of muzzleload, I walked somewhere between, I don't know, 8 to 12 miles, somewhere in that ballpark. And I was on my way back to camp that afternoon after making my loop, and I was probably kind of slipping through a palmetto head on the edge of a cypress. And so the wind was out of the west, and I was walking kind of right down the western edge of this palmetto patch, kind of just letting my scent blow back over the palmettos to potentially wind bump a buck out of that. It wasn't quite that right time for them to be up on their feet. Then I came to a log, just kind of took a break, and I sat there, and I'm sitting in this log, and I'm thinking, man, there was a little finger that kind of came off of this little cabbage head, or this palmetto head, and it kind of went right up to the edge of the cypress. And I'm sitting there, and from there you could kind of with a little bit of a clearing to the right and a little bit of clearing to the left at that little point. And I'm sitting there on this log. I'm thinking, man, that is just an ideal spot for a buck to be bedded down. I mean, nothing's going to sneak up on him from behind, right? Because he has to come through the palmetto head, and he's going to make tons of noise. And he can see all out in front of him through the clearing, and there's easy access to that cypress, which is a great place for him to just vanish and get away. And I'm sitting there. I probably sat there for 20 minutes just taking a water break. I stood up and took one step, and right from this point, 30 yards in front of me, up jumps a 70, 80-inch 8-point. And in 2 hops, it's in the cypress and is gone. It's just vanished. And I thought, well, isn't that funny? So I do believe that they use both scent and sight to their advantage when possible.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Okay.
I mean, that's really, really good stuff, man. And I know we're running short on time. We've talked a lot about the opportunity and just the I guess really the inevitable, which is that where you're at, opportunities are gonna be very rare. And I think everybody who's listening to this is probably wondering, just like I am. So you hunt throughout the whole season. How many, if a guy does their homework like you do, really learns how to hunt these areas effectively, how often would you say you're able to have an opportunity on a mature deer?
Throughout the entire season, archery, muzzleload, general gun?
Yeah, just everything.
On a mature deer, if you really put your homework in and you scout, you put boots on the ground, and you spend time in the seat, you should be able to have, I would say, again, with all of those things taken into consideration, you should have a couple of opportunities in a year.
Wow. I mean, that
is, when I say a couple of opportunities, I mean like actually spending time hunting, not hunting, one Saturday morning a month.
Right.
Or 2 Saturday mornings a month. I'm talking actually weekend warrior, you're in the stand Saturday morning before the sun comes up. Unfortunately, because access can be quite brutal, a lot of times it's an all-day sit till 9 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah.
And so if you can do that, and you can do that, if you put the time in, you'll have a couple of opportunities a year. I'd say 2, maybe 3. And when I say mature deer, it might be a mature deer, but he still may only be 70, 80 inches.
Wow. That's crazy, man. Well, dude, Ryan.
Did you guys know to enter the Florida Buck Registry, it only has to be 100 inches?
Really?
Yes.
So
Yep.
I was talking to maybe my buddy Nick Chandler, who's been a guest on the show. I don't know. Do you know Nick, Ryan?
It's really familiar, so I would say yes. I probably am friends with him on the Insta.
So he's got a buck that we talked about in a podcast at the beginning of bow season this last year that got stolen. He was hunting a WMA, and a guy, he had shot this deer, and he shot it a little farther back, and the deer ended up running about 100 yards to where another guy was hunting and dropped dead. Didn't have... Anyways, I don't want to get the story mixed up, but anyway, that guy that took it was baiting, and so by the time Nick got to it and tracked it, it was gone. The guy had already registered it, and he got the whole. So Nick got the whole shot on camera and everything, and I mean, it's a tank, and I think that was going to be maybe his first deer in the Florida Buck Registry or something like that. And I could be getting stories mixed up, but I believe that was what he told us. So, I mean, that's crazy. And I'm glad that Florida has that. I guess I was more saying on the national scale of Pope and Young, Boone and Crockett, and those type of. It really should be adjusted for, especially Florida. Florida is just. it's unreasonable to me to think that Florida should be in the same class. And maybe they have, and I just don't know. But
yeah, it is, and really, Florida is. I mean, Florida can produce some really good animals. Just different zones, kind of have their own. Not. I mean, So Cypress is about an hour to an hour and 20 minutes away from me south, and just north of me, another hour. I know guys that when now this is not public land, this is private land, but when fed nutrition and when allowed to get to 5.5, 6.5 years old, 7 years old on ranches, not necessarily high fence, but private ranches, they're killing 150, 160 inch animals.
Yeah.
So Florida can produce those in certain areas, and obviously North Florida, you get into Washington County and up that direction, Madison, they kill some absolute giants. I think the record in Florida actually came out of, I believe, Hillsborough County, and it's like a 206.
Yeah.
But that was some genetic mutation of the deer that just his horns never stopped growing. So
yeah.
It's very much your trophy is relative to where you're hunting. When I was in Arizona, I killed a 94-inch Coues deer. And my buddy that lives out there, has hunted this entire life out there, told me, he says, that is like killing a 160 muley. You put that on the wall. Wow. So he is a taxidermist currently.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool. That'd be a really fun hunt. But, dude,
it's a great hunt, actually.
I really want to go and try one of those Western hunts like that at some point. I think it'd be a lot of fun. But I'll tell you one thing, for me, I really, 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 you've just made my bug to kill a deer in Florida even bigger. Like, that's been one of my greatest goals. I've hunted it now for 2 years, and I haven't been able to kill a buck, but I've had a blast learning and talking. And part of the reason why I like having Florida guests on the show is because I feel like it makes me that much closer to being able to kill a buck for myself in Florida. And so, man, I do really appreciate you coming on the show, man. And like I said, Local Legends is average guys having above average success. And it sounds like you're putting in above average work to be able to do that. And so, man, I just commend you for it. Great job. I hope your season, which is about to kick off like this month, right? Like in July.
Yeah, like I said, it's either the last weekend of July or the first weekend of August. I can't remember which right now, but I'm sure I'll be on the phone looking it up as soon as we hang up.
That's awesome, dude. Well, man, I do appreciate it again. Drew, do you have any more questions for Ryan?
No, man. It's been so cool. Just like I said, grew up in Florida and didn't even know this type of hunting existed, and so it's been very, very cool just to sit back and listen to and around. Hopefully, we can see some some deer on either your Facebook or Instagram this upcoming fall or summer, actually, because you started in July. So
that's crazy. Well, Ryan,
absolutely,
dude,
looking forward to it.
Again, really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on the show.
You got it, guys. Thanks for having me, and have a wonderful evening.
All right, thanks again, Ryan, for coming on the show, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. Like I said, that was episode 2 of the Local Legend series. We're going to be doing this series all throughout the month of July, and I think you're going to enjoy some of our guests we've got coming up. We're going to be covering Tennessee, Arkansas, and Alabama. It's going to be a blast. We got some really cool guests lined up for that, and I do not think you'll want to miss it. Want to tell you guys before we go, one more thing, that you can win the tethered Phantom saddle. If you know anything about saddle hunting, you know that the Phantom is a big deal. It's the best saddle, in my opinion, that's been made so far. It's so freaking awesome, so comfortable, and you can win one. All you have to do is go to the Southern Ground Hunting YouTube channel and subscribe, and that's all you've got to do. Like I've said before, we are moving all of our hunting content and video content to the Southern Ground Hunting channel on our own channel now, and we're super excited about that. But want to let you guys know that you can, in fact, win a tethered Phantom saddle for free by subscribing to the Southern Ground Hunting YouTube channel. Also, check us out on Facebook at Southern Ground Hunting, on Instagram at Southern Ground Hunting. You can also go to our website, at southerngroundhunting.com, and you can find some of our merch. We've got hats and shirts and stuff like that for sale. We've got a blog on there that is not updated a lot because I feel like I'm a pretty crappy writer. But there is some good stuff there as well. That's southerngroundhunting.com. And that is going to be it for today. Thank you guys so much for listening. And if you are going to be out in the woods, remember that God gave you dominion over the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, and the beasts of the earth. So go out and exercise that dominion. We'll talk to you next time.